come in, sit down, everybody, all of y'all, because we all need to know. Welcome to episode 2 of Inside the Mind of T. This is Mindful Monday. I think that's what I'm going to call it from now on, since I'm going to be posting on Mondays. That's what I'm going to do from now on. Mindful Mondays is what it's going to be called, because we're getting inside the mind, okay? Period. So today's episode is going to be about the government and how it works and how each branch works and what goes into it and everything, like I said, stated in the very beginning of the episode. But we're going to get on the way that I said my podcast was going to work in my first episode, and I want to go ahead and talk about the 3 current events that happened this week. I just want to talk about them very briefly. So the first thing that I want to talk about is Nikki on Turning Point USA. I posted a video on my TikTok about it, but that's more of a fun fact current event. It's not really fun, but it's more of a like a fun-ish current event. It's not so serious. I put it on here because it was just interesting to see her on there, which, you know, the bars are the barbs and they're going to support regardless. So I wanted to touch on that. That's a current event that happened this week. I'm not going to say too much on that. Go watch my TikTok video if you want to see how I really feel about that. So yeah, next we have the missing Epstein files. They released some, but some were redacted, missing. Apparently there are about 16 files that were missing or disappeared. Apparently by law, some of them didn't have to be released, but some of them were released and then taken away by Saturday. So I don't know how that worked, but you know, you never know with this Department of Justice, especially with this new one we got here. So yeah, that's one. The Brown University school shooting took place on the 13th of December, and 2 people were killed, 9 were wounded, and a MIT professor was killed. Can I say that on here? I don't know what I can say on here, y'all. I'm so tired of this censoring. It's so annoying. But yeah, they were all wounded, and 2 were murdered, and I believe, and then the name was Claudio Valente. I don't want to say his name wrong, which I guess it shouldn't really matter if he killed people, but Claudio Valente, he was 48 years old. A lot of people say that he was kind and sweet, people that went to school with him, but I don't know what exactly went left with him, but he definitely ended up doing what he did. That's very unfortunate. I feel very bad for the victims and their families, and I wish them nothing but the best moving forward. So now that the current events are out of the way, like I said, there will be more interesting current events. There will be more current events that are outside the U.S. coming up. Whatever I find interesting randomly, then I'll definitely talk about it in the videos. Right now, these are just the ones that I came across this week that I want to talk about. Not all of them are always going to be serious. Not all of them are always going to be playful. Not really playful, because like I said, the Nikki one is not playful, but it's not super serious. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about the main topic of this video today. The main topic of this video is how the government works in the U.S. and what goes into it. This is Civics 101. Come in, sit down, everybody, all of y'all, because we all need to know. We all need to know how this stuff works, because I don't think a lot of people really knows how this stuff works. That's why they blame this person or that person or this government or that government, or they blame Democrats or the Republicans of how things are going and why sometimes things work out for this president and why things don't work out for that president. And you know, I'm gonna try to stay as neutral as I can when I'm explaining certain things, but I think if you come from my TikTok, then you already know where I stand. But explaining how the government works in general, this is what this video is going to be about. Moving forward, might be a little hard to stay a little neutral as I explain things, but we'll see. Let's start with why we have the branches of the government, okay? So the reason why we have the branches of the government is because there is something called Montesquieu's separation of powers. He came up with the separation of powers. Separation of powers goes into 3 different branches of the government. We have the legislative branch, the executive branch, and we have the judicial branch. The reason why he thought we needed these branches is because he wanted to make sure that tyranny was not going to be an issue. Tyranny is when one person or one group controls everything and can make decisions for everything and everybody with their own selfish intent. So he wants to prevent that in the states as much as possible, and he came up with this idea, which is, you know, everybody having their own individual set of powers. They have their own way of working, and they have something called checks and balances, which I will get into all of that moving forward. Let's get into the first branch of the government that I want to speak about, and that is the legislative branch. The legislative branch consists of Congress, In Congress, you have the House of Representatives and you have the Senate. The Senate consists of 100 members. There are 100 members in there. There are 2 per state, and that they represent the entire state. House of Representatives, they have 435 members, and it depends on the population of what state they're representing, right? The House of Representatives are selected every 2 years, and then the Senate is selected every 6 years. So the House of Representatives are led by the Speaker of the House, and the current Speaker of the House is Mike Johnson, and then the President of the Senate is the Vice President of the United States, and that is J.D. Vance. How does the bill passing process work? I don't think I really knew exactly how it worked before doing my little bit of research on it, but apparently it makes sense as to why things take so long to get passed, why things take so long to get amended. It's a whole thing that goes into it, but I'm gonna break it down very briefly and try to chop it up for y'all so it can be very, very simply put. So the House of Representatives, they have to come up with the idea, and then once they come up with the idea, it is sent to a committee to see if the idea is good to be put on the floor or, and voted on. If it is decided that it can be voted on, then they will then move it to the floor and everybody will vote on it in the House of Representatives. If 218 out of the 435 in the House of Representatives vote on it and they pass it, then it will be able to be sent to the Senate to be voted on. If 51 of the 100 Senate members vote on it and pass it, then it will be then sent back through to the House of Representatives, see if things need to be changed, agreed upon, and then it will, if it's all agreed upon, then it will be sent to the president. It will be sent through something called a enrollment process, to where the president he can either sign it into law or veto it. A veto is when the president decides to knock it down. He's not going to sign it into law. Sign it into law means he's going to make it a law and everybody agrees upon everything. Now, if the president does not sign it into law, or if he doesn't veto it within 10 days, then it automatically becomes law, unless Congress decides not to make it into law anymore, unless they decide they don't want it anymore. What's the problem with this whole process? Why does it seem to take so long? Why can't people just come together? Why can't they just agree to agree and, just pass the bill, have the president sign it? I think we can all guess and figure out why it's not as simple as it seems, because the House and the Senate are made up of 2 different parties, and that's the Republicans and the Democrats. Of course, there are differing sides. There are differences of opinions, and there is something called bicameralism. Bicameralism, it means that there has to be identical versions of the same law written from both sides. The Senate and the House of Representatives, they have to agree upon the same things, and it has to be written up the exact same way for it to be passed. It cannot be small little changes here, small little things there. It can't be none of that. It has to be exactly the same in order for the same versions. Let me make sure that's what I put in here. It has to be the same versions of the law, which makes it even more difficult for things to be passed. It makes it even more difficult for things to be passed through the committee that I was speaking of. Let me get into an example of how what they do impacts the average person. I'm going to get into I'm going to give examples for each branch and how each branch does impact the average person, and why it is important for us to make an impact on them, which is voting, or, doing what we got to do to make sure that we get the people they're there for our best interest. Okay. So I'm not going to dig too deep into each example, but I'm going to give a quick little overview of something, and then I'm going to explain what one side wanted, what the other side wanted, and go from there. For this one, is going to be the government shutdown. The government shutdown, y'all know it just happened and it just ended. And pretty much I'm going to explain one thing that the Republicans wanted, one thing that the Democrats wanted, and why it took so long to pass, or why the government shutdown was so long. So pretty much one thing that the Republicans wanted in the Senate was they wanted a funding bill passed, but they also wanted, let me go more specific, they wanted the Affordable Care Act removed. They didn't want that anymore, which is, making insurance affordable for the average person. They did not no longer want that to be a thing, whereas the Democrats, they want it to be a thing. Now, the House, they were able to pass a temporary funding bill to prevent a government shutdown, but the Senate, they did not. The Senate has about 53 members in the seats right now, which is the majority of the Senate, and also there are a majority of the House the Republicans are the majority of the House. So that's why they have a lot of leverage, they have a lot of pull, they can make a lot of decisions, or they can hold a lot of things. So when the bill got to the Senate, or when it got to the Senate, it was easy for them to kind of hold off to get what they wanted. Pretty much how the government shutdown affected us, I'm sure we all know. A lot of things were shut down. Traveling was a lot more. It was a lot more of a hassle. Government workers were not being paid, which is a huge issue. It affected the average person because TSA workers are the average person. Also, they have to go home, they have to pay bills, they have to do a lot of things. So it affected the average person. Also, if the Affordable Care Act is removed, that's going to make it very, very hard for the average person to have affordable health care. That's what it was there for. A lot of people called the Affordable Care Act Obamacare. Also, another way that this whole government shutdown affected people is they were able to leverage food stamps. So this is why it's very important for people to be into politics, or even just be aware. You don't have to really too much get into the nitty gritty of everything, but I think it is important for people to be into politics enough to be aware of what's going on, because you don't want to wake up one day and you expect to get your food stamps and either half of them are gone or all of them are gone, and you're like, wait, what happened? What's going on? You don't know what's going on. You didn't know what's coming because you weren't proactive in knowing what's going on in your government, in your country, because it affects you. It affects all of us, regardless of what's going on or what we think. It affects us all. The government shutdown did end, thankfully, so people were paid back pay. And I don't think the food stamps are fully back in full effect, because I do know somebody who has food stamps. I don't think it's back in full. But yeah, they were able to come to a compromise because some Democrats decided to, agree with some of the Republicans and go that way to give them some things that they wanted. So yeah, hopefully we'll just see how those things turn out in the future. Let me get into the judicial system. The judicial system is made up of the Supreme Court and then the lower courts. The Supreme Court, they are appointed by the president, whoever the president may be, if there are slots available. And then the lower courts consist of the district courts and then the U.S. appellate courts, or the 13 U.S. Court of Appeals. And the Court of Appeals, they decide on cases that are from the district courts, which are still a part of the lower courts. They decide on what needs to be appealed and what doesn't. So I'm getting into Supreme Court and what they consist of and how they are put into office. And I'm going to read their names and who they were appointed by. So first we have Clarence Thomas. He was appointed by George H.W. Bush. We have Samuel Alito Jr. He was appointed by George W. Bush. We have Sonia Sotomayor, and she was appointed by Barack Obama. Elena Kagan, appointed by Barack Obama. Neil Gorsuch, Donald Trump. Brett Kavanaugh, Donald Trump. Amy Barrett, Donald Trump. And then we have Ketanji Jackson by Joe Biden. They are appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate. Let's get into what they were supposed to be put in place for. When they were originally thought of and originally put in place, what Montesquieu wanted and how he kind of envisioned it to go, it was to have another check and balance in place to where the judges are there to make straight, he wanted to make sure that we had somebody in power who was there to make decisions that were just based on just justice. They weren't to be swayed by any political views, anything but justice for all. Now, of course, that didn't always stay that way. Also, they don't hold any financial or military power, so pretty much they can not make any huge decisions in those aspects. So it also it's supposed to help them make decisions that are not politically charged, that are not selfishly charged. They're just straight by law, by constitution. Let's get into the cons of having of what's been going on in this modern day judicial system, or Supreme Court at least. So I think some cons are that they have lifetime appointments. I feel very strongly about this. I made a video about this on my TikTok before. I feel as though that it's very hard for older people to get out of their way. It's very hard to get them out of their mindset and how they think and how they've always thought. And it's very hard for people who don't live the same life to make sound decisions over a group of people that is ever changing, ever evolving, it's just very hard to keep up with the times and understand why we need certain things now versus why we needed certain things when they were appointed 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. It's very hard to, even 20 years ago, because times change constantly. So I do think that having lifetime appointments are it's very hard for it to be reasonable nowadays, because like I said, there's some things that I don't even agree with my own grandparents, and they don't agree with it I do, or even my own parents, and they're only in their 40s. That it's just there should be an age limit on stuff like this, because sometimes we just don't get each other. Now, of course, the older people, they're wise, so of course we can listen to them on certain things because they've been there before, like relationship advice or financial advice or something like that. But when it comes to things that are over a body of people, especially a body of a lot of young people, it just doesn't make sense for them to be in there for a lifetime, because the only way that they can get out of office is if they die, or if they resign, or if they're impeached by the Senate. Another con could be that it's just cognitive challenges once you get older. With old age, you just can't really operate the same. You can't really think the same sometimes. So it's very hard for people to even keep up with themselves now. So I think I think there should be an age limit on every office, especially the presidency, especially the Supreme Court. There should be a age limit on these things, because we don't need to be worried about people kicking a bucket or falling off bikes, or their hands are looking a certain type of way because they have a certain medical condition that we don't know about yet. There is a lot of things that our leaders should be, and I'm not trying to come off, what's that word? Ageist? Is it ageist? I'm not trying to come off ageist, but realistically, we need people who are fit for the position, because they want people that are fit for other positions. That's why they took DEI. They think people aren't fit for certain positions and qualify for certain positions. Well, let's talk about these age limits that we should have put in place. Realistically, we need somebody who is cognitively there in a lot of aspects to be able to make sound decisions, without worrying about any medical concerns coming into play, which we all can get medical issues throughout life, of course. But of course, they're more prone to getting these issues as they get older, realistically. Another con to this is it allows the president to stack the Supreme Court, and it can stay stacked for a very long time, depending on when somebody is supposed to kick the bucket. And if you don't know what kick the bucket is, I'm just trying to give a watered down way of saying, right? Because I don't know what I can say on here. So it's just a watered down way of saying that. I don't really know. I don't really like the idea that things can be stacked. Of course, if right now it's stacked the Republican way, and of course a lot of people they love that idea right now. And of course, a lot of Democrats don't like that idea right now, because it's not supposed to be politically charged. It's not supposed to be a politically charged bench, but it is. So now these decisions are coming into play, and they affect the average person. Let me get into 2 Supreme Court cases that definitely affected the average person, and why they were very important to what we look at in life now, or what we go through in life now. So let's get into the first case that I want to talk about is Roe v. Wade. And I'm sure we all know what Roe v. Wade is at this point. It was a case that took place on January 22nd, 1973, and it was deemed constitutional to have an abortion. But June 24th, 2022 is when it was deemed unconstitutional, and individual states had the power to decide if they wanted to allow abortions or not. Now, whether you're pro-life or pro-choice, it has definitely affected a lot of people, a lot of women specifically, in their choices and whether they want to have a baby right now or not. And it has made it a lot more of a hassle depending on where you are, because now people, they have to go to different states to get these done, or even the doctors, they're more worried about what they can and cannot do. I've heard some stories of some of them waiting on lawyers to be contacted to make sure that they can do certain things. A lot of people, some people die on the way. Some people on the way to different states. Some people it's just so many different reasons as to why this was not a good thing for a lot of people in a lot of areas. It has made also an influx of people coming to different states. So now it seems like a lot of states that are still allowing it, now they're always having a lot of people, a lot of patience, because people are coming from different states now. They have to be able to cater to a lot of people that are not even from here. So or from here, because North Carolina is a state that still allows it. So North Carolina or any other state that still allows abortions to happen, whether you're pro-life or pro-choice, it has definitely affected a lot of people. Now, on the flip side of that, even though it's affected people negatively, I'm sure a lot of people who were pro-life and who wanted this overturned, they feel very good about it, which that's their prerogative. They believe in what they believe in. So to them, the only reason that I can chalk it up to be as to why they think it's good is because it's another life that gets to come on earth eventually, potentially, but that's about it. It's not because they want to be able to take care of this life. It's not because they want to be able to nurture this life. It's not because they want to be able to help the parents of this life. They just want another person here, and that's it. I think that's the basis of their beliefs, regardless of how they want to spin it. It's the basis of their beliefs. So another one that I want to get into is the Brown versus Board of Education. If you have not heard of this case, it is a very well-known case because it deemed separate but equal, especially in schools, unconstitutional in 1954. It was deemed unconstitutional for separate but equal to be a thing in schools. And now, obviously today, we do not have separate schools, or we don't have separate races in different schools. Of course, you have HBCUs, you have PWIs, but you can no longer be racially biased towards anybody blatantly, right? So yeah, that's one thing that has affected the average person, and we love that because it's changed the trajectory of a lot of things and a lot of people's lives. Because now it took a while for everything to be integrated and everything to be kind of course, to where it is now, but this is one case that has made a huge impact on America in general. To the last branch of the government, and that is the executive branch. Let's get into the executive branch. So the executive branch is led by the President of the United States, and the current President of the United States is Donald Trump, and his Vice President is J.D. Vance. So the President of the United States, they have to be at least 35 years old, a natural born citizen, and they have to have been a U.S. citizen for at least 14 years. They are the Commander-in-Chief of Armed Forces, so they can make certain decisions like that if they want to or if they need to. They are elected every 4 years, and by the citizens, and then the Electoral College comes into play, and there are about 538 electors in place to make that final decision. They have the power to sign or veto bills, as I explained earlier. If the legislative branch they're coming to a decision on if a bill needs, or if they want a bill to be passed and they agree on it and it makes it to the president's desk, they have the power to sign or veto it. And like I said, vetoing means that they are not signing it into law. The president decides, no, we're not doing it. Or he decides, yes, we're doing it. Or he just didn't do anything, and then it's up to Congress now to make that decision. But the executive branch's main role is to execute and enforce the law. So they're here to make sure that laws they're definitely being upheld and stuff like that. And they're pretty much just the face of the country. They are in charge of the diplomacy. They can talk to other presidents and other dictators or whatever, other governments for us, and they can make certain decisions and certain relationships for us. And they do those things for us because they are the face of the government. They can also grant pardons and clemencies for people with federal crimes. And an example is like Kodak Black, or who else did they pardon? NBA YoungBoy. So they can do certain things with their power. J.D. Vance is the vice president, and then after that, the president also has a group of advisors called the cabinet. So there are different roles in the cabinet, different titles, different positions in the cabinet that they advise him on certain things in the government or what's going on for their specific thing. So that's their role in the executive branch. So let me bring this back full circle. Like I said, this was Montesquieu's idea of how the government should work, especially for a country that is relatively large and it's over a large group of people, and how he thought checks and balances would be the best idea for this country. Because if you don't have checks and balances, like I said, if you have the legislative branch, and the legislative branch is mainly Republican right now. If you had just them, then they could make all decisions for everybody, and there would be no balance in place to where the president could come in and step in and maybe say some certain things, or he could come in and sign into law what they want or not. There would be a lot of things that could pass, whether if it's the judicial system, the judges. If there was no way to appoint judges, and anybody could come in and they could make the same decisions, and they have lifetime appointments, there will be no balance there either. Even though the lifetime appointments thing, even though I feel how I feel about the lifetime appointments thing, there's still one way for them to get in, which is by a certain president or by a president in general. They can't just come in and just do anything that they want. So, and they could be impeached also. So it's still a balance there. And then the executive branch. The executive branch, they don't have too many powers as much as people think. The Senate, the Congress, legislative branch, they have a lot of control over a lot of things. They sign off on a lot of things. They sign off on a lot of funding bills and stuff like that. Like the president couldn't really do nothing with the Senate during the government shutdown. The government could just be shut down, and that's just that, because they had to make their own decisions on what they wanted to do, and they had to pass a certain law on what they want to do because of the things that I explained that goes into them passing laws. So the president, all he had to do was sit there, and whether it played into his agenda or not, that was their decision to do what they wanted to do. And the president and the executive branch, they had to sit back and watch. There are checks and balances in place for those specific reasons. I think it's very important. And I think it's very important for people to, like I said, be aware of what's going on. Even if you're not into politics, it's very important to know how these things work. It's very important to understand why certain presidents get away with certain things and why certain presidents don't. If you have a majority Republican government, then of course they're going to sign off on things that a Republican president wants a lot easier and a lot sooner than whether it's flipped. So if you have mainly Republican legislative branch, and then you have a Democratic president, it'll be very, very hard for the Democratic president to get what he wants done, because you have the Congress who's majority the other side, and it's very hard for them to understand and why he wants what he wants, or it's just politically charged and they just don't want to give nobody anything. Or vice versa, if it's a Democratic government or legislative branch and then you have a Republican president, it'll be a little bit easier for them to shut him down. So it's checks and balances. And if we vote, do our research, understand what goes into these things, understand why certain presidents get away with certain things and why certain presidents does not, why it seems like certain presidents got a lot more done and why certain presidents have not. Once you understand how the government really works, then you will be able to really understand why it is important for us to do our part as citizens, which is voting. And in my future episodes, I'm definitely going to get into why it is important to vote, why is it important to not allow to speak up, and make sure that our voices are heard and make sure that we're represented in the best way possible, because the majority of us are the average person. The majority of us do not have millions and millions and millions and billions of dollars sitting around somewhere for us to go to a different country or something ain't working out, okay? We don't have that. So we need to make sure that we are getting the best representation that we can get for us to live great lives, as best lives as possible. So yeah, I will have all of my sources linked, and y'all can do more research. This is just a quick video because I'm going to be talking about politics more on my channel, and I'm going to get into a lot more things more on my channel. This was just a quick introduction into the government, and you can do more research if you want to. Like I said, sources will be linked. If there's anything that I missed or that I didn't dig deep enough into, let me know. I'll probably talk about it on my TikTok, or talk about it more when I get into more politics on this channel as I go along. This was, like I said, was just a quick overview of how things work generally in the government, why it was made this way. So yes, stay tuned for more videos. Thank you for watching this video, and be ready for the next Mindful Monday coming up next Monday. Thank you.